They came from cities and small towns, from farms and homesteads.
I was born in Elmore City, Oklahoma.
Broken Bow, Oklahoma.
I was born in Louisiana.
I was born in Platteville, Colorado in 1920.
Most leaving home for the first time.
Most of our battalion was made up of high school kids just like me, you know.
We were kids, and what we did was amazing.
They arrived in the middle of nowhere for one thing, to learn to fight. The Army told them this would be the best place to train. Nowhere was the Desert Training Center in the Mojave Desert, where 1 million young Americans would prepare to join the battle to win World War II. The 20th century was witness to war on a scale never before imagined. World War I, called the War to End All Wars, was merely a prelude to an even greater conflict.
Well, by the late 1930s, Germany was armed to the teeth. And what's more, the Germans had developed a new technique of warfare called blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Tank warfare, heavily mechanized warfare using heavily armored military vehicles on the battlefield that could move very quickly and envelop the adversary quickly. This was the essence of blitzkrieg, and it was the type of warfare on which Germany made its principal bet.
Comforted by the illusion of neutrality, America was content to merely provide war supplies to the Allies for a war we didn't believe was ours.
From America, they will get tanks and guns and ammunition and supplies of all kinds.
That illusion, however, was shattered on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
I was only about 17 years old. I wasn't ready for wars and all that stuff then. I was ready for skating rinks and just dancing with girls.
Somebody said the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, and being very bright and articulate and up to date, I asked, where is Pearl Harbor?
Japanese planes have been sowing death and destruction for an hour on American houses.
Tens of thousands of young men reported for duty, flooding training camps with raw recruits.
I was fighting because I was supposed to. I was drafted. I'm no hero.
I received my draft notice. It was one of the happiest days of my life.
I got a dear letter from the president, a nice dear letter, John. Tickled to death to know that you're gonna be joining my army.
I wasn't ready to fight, especially with a gun, because that's dangerous.
The Japanese attack put American forces on the defensive in the Pacific. While most of his advisors favored a direct assault on Hitler in Europe, President Roosevelt agreed to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's plan to attack the Axis powers in North Africa, where they were weaker. But American troops would need training and conditioning to contend with the special demands of desert warfare.
We found out that we were being transferred out of basic training into a specialized training.
We thought we was training to go to North Africa and get Rommel with Patton.
The War Department assigned the task of finding an appropriate location for training troops to fight in desert conditions to General George Patton.
George Patton grew up in Southern California, largely in Pasadena, in the shadow of the San Gabriel Mountains, on the other side of which begins the Mojave Desert. He knew it as a boy and a young man, and he knew there was a lot of fairly empty real estate out there. And more than many of his contemporaries, he understood the logic of mechanized warfare, tank warfare, and how it can change the nature of the whole battlefield dynamic.
After a 4-day tour of prospective sites, Patton declared it the best training area he'd ever seen. It was desolate, remote, and in his estimation, large enough for any training exercise. The boundaries of the Desert Training Center spanned an area from southeastern California to western Arizona and the southern tip of Nevada.
What you see behind me is just a small part of what was once the enormous 18,000 square mile Desert Training Center. It was established in April of 1942. There were steep mountains, deep valleys, playas, dry lake beds, rugged washes. It was really a rough terrain and the perfect place to prepare our men for the rigors of combat that they would soon be facing.
Encampments housing over 15,000 men each had to be carved out of the desert sands. Virtual tent cities with streets, water, electricity, communications, and medical facilities.
We were organizing our hospital to function as a hospital with what we had, and you had nothing. You started from scratch. Most hospitalization during wartime or not is actually taking care of medical patients rather than wartime wounds. But I had enough of that later too.
Water came from the Colorado River Aqueduct, built in the 30s to supply the city of Los Angeles, while 3 different rail lines crossing the Mojave brought in supplies, equipment, and troops. By the spring of 1942, the DTC was in operation. Having gone through basic training elsewhere and assigned to established units, troops were coming to complete their training in Golden, California, the land of movie stars, orange groves, and sun-drenched beaches, or so they thought.
The biggest surprise to me was wondering where in the hell are we going? We didn't know where it was going.
And Lord, you could see the morale of the boys, how it dropped when they found out that we was going to be sent to a desert. You take old farm boys, they weren't ready for desert sand right then.
You should have heard some of these guys cuss in California. But you can't blame them not seeing any place else in the state and then dropping them off here in no man's land. Sergeant Horace Barrett, 709th Tank Battalion.
A lot of the guys, they groaned. When I saw the desert, I loved it. We went out there, it was springtime. The desert was blooming.
We're at the former site of Camp Iron Mountain. Across the highway was Camp Granite. Down the highway a few miles was Camp Coxcomb. Just among these 3 divisional camps, there could be upwards of 50,000 men in training and living here in the desert during a 3-month rotation.
There were 12 such camps and numerous substations, totaling almost 200,000 men at its busiest. The division camps were like small towns. At Camp Iron Mountain, you can still see the altars where Army chaplains conducted outdoor services. One for Catholics and one for Protestants. The town residents, soldiers, demonstrated pride in their neighborhoods by creating decorative rock alignments with unit symbols, and even landscaping with desert shrubs. Nevertheless, Patton insisted on Spartan facilities that mirrored field conditions. So there were no barracks, no mess halls, nothing permanent, just tents.
We had a tent where we lived 4 in a tent with dirt floors and cots.
Sandstorms. You could be laying on your cot, taking a little rest coming from a 15-mile hike, and all of a sudden, it was like a whirlwind going around in a circle, and all of a sudden, when that whirlwind got underneath that big pyramidal tent, it just destroyed it, just take it away.
Then from there, we graduated to pup tents. And then from there, we graduated to sleeping on the ground, no tents at all.
It was just sand in your bed, sand in your shoes. We had to live with sand. We got where we hated sand.
There was no place to relax. There was no kitchens. Eating out in the desert, finding a rock to sit down on, and probably had Jell-O and gravy all in the same cubicle.
It was hot, sweaty, and dirty. But I guess they wanted to put us through some of that stuff because we was going to get a bunch of it later.
Once settled in camp, the men trained from morning until night. Pilots practiced bombing, strafing, aerial combat, and troop support maneuvers, while tankers learned battlefield tactics and techniques, making use of the wide open spaces. Engineering battalions constructed camps, airfields, and other facilities. Supply units learned to operate within vast distances. And the foot soldier, he learned how to attack the enemy, to take and hold ground, to contend with the desert, and to survive.
Monday night, we left her on a 200-mile road march with the new tanks. We didn't have any sleep from Sunday night to Wednesday night. We were on the road with the tanks all of that time. It was hell. Sergeant Horace Barrett, 709th Tank Battalion.
We didn't rest at all. We had limited water. Imagine in the heat how much water we required. And guys were actually fainting and dropping like flies.
What you've tried to do is to forget about where you are, to forget about the heat. Keep those things off your mind and do what you were taught to do about conserving water.
We had to dig in the gun, dig foxholes, and simulate combat. Out of the desert, I must have dug 1,000 holes.
Some infantrymen had to dig this foxhole as a part of an extensive defensive position arrayed all along this ridge here. You can see hundreds of foxholes and other defensive positions, and it was all designed in a strategic way to command the heights over this valley that approaches Palin Pass.
The training by smaller units was expanded into larger division-size engagements. Ultimately, multiple divisions involving tens of thousands of men and their equipment would face off in the desert.
Well, this really is the holy grail of training for the Desert Training Center. This is Palin Pass, right behind me. Commanders had to learn how to not only coordinate working infantry and armor and artillery and aircraft together, but they had to learn how to do the logistics of supplying those men in the field and working communications to an effective way.
Difference between maneuvers and actual battles is that live ammunition isn't coming at you in maneuvers. It physically helped people develop themselves. Also, it instilled teamwork and comradeship, which you needed in actual battle.
Because of its scale and terrain, Palin Pass maneuvers were like a dress rehearsal for the real combat in North Africa.
I was stationed in Algeria. It reminded me of the Mojave Desert. When I was in combat, the training I had there showed up on my missions. It was ideal for training.
First came the airplanes and strafed the hell out of it. Then the artillery shells began to cover the ground, and next came tanks rumbling into the pass, blasting away, and finally, streams of troops. There was so much dust and smoke up there, you wouldn't think anything could be alive for miles. Sergeant Joe Delgado.
Of course, life at the camps wasn't non-stop training. Men did have days off to write letters back home, or just sit around and play cards.
It's hot and dusty, and you just make do with what's available. Off duty, you can't do much. There are crap games and card games, and they have a PX that serves warm beer when they can get it. Lieutenant Gil Terry, 736 Tank Battalion.
Throw the football and played a little baseball and stuff like that. Running in the sand. Yeah, it was a good practice.
Los Angeles, real civilization, was 200 miles away. So celebrities would come out with the USO and entertain the troops. The Desert Battalion brought busloads of chaperoned young women to the camps for dances in the desert. While American troops fought the Axis powers in the name of freedom and human dignity, the Army itself practiced segregation, a reflection of the period. African-American soldiers at the DTC served in all-black units, tasked with service and support duties rather than combat preparation.
Most of the outfits that the blacks were in were working outfits, labor outfits. It was our way of living all during the war. We were segregated.
Although Patton didn't change this practice of prejudice while at the Desert Training Center, he was a highly practical commander in combat. He relied heavily on the 761st Tank Battalion, an all-African-American unit, to spearhead engagements in his relentless pursuit of the enemy.
Patton thought everybody was the same. When you're in combat, you don't need to be discriminated against another guy that's in combat with you. He's doing the same thing you're doing.
Patton left the DTC in November of 1942 to lead untested American forces in Operation Torch, a campaign to defeat Rommel in North Africa.
Forge ahead to try and effect a junction with the British 8th Army.
The North African campaign was the first time the American forces in World War II confronted the Nazi and fascist adversary. And it was a pretty bloody training ground because the American troops were not that well prepared. They were quite green troops. One of the things that became apparent in North Africa was integrating ground troops, infantry, tank, mobile warfare. Proved to be very, very, very complicated. We got our noses very badly bloodied at places like Kasserine Pass and others.
The disaster at Kasserine Pass led overall commanding General Dwight Eisenhower to place Patton in charge of the Second Corps. Patton immediately set out to restore discipline and morale. Having never trained under Patton or at the Desert Training Center, soldiers received a crash course in Patton doctrine.
Our first introduction to George Patton. Off to the left was a guy with a shiny helmet and a couple of ivory, not pearl handled, ivory 44s, not 45s, standing next to a Jeep. And he stopped our unit. He looked at us and he said, "You are the yellowest sons of bitches I've ever seen."
Shortly after Patton's arrival, the Second Corps was put to the test at El Guetar, where American GIs were ordered to hold their ground, while the British 8th Army attacked the Axis forces. Caught in a vice, Rommel sent his trusted 10th Panzer Division to break through the American lines, only to be repulsed and decimated in what became the first American victory against the German Wehrmacht.
So the experiences received in battles in overseas locations, particularly North Africa, were brought back here to the Desert Training Center, and they were applied to the training doctrines used here.
You don't knock out a Tiger tank by firing a 75mm gun straight at him. So you've got to find a way to maneuver around him. And the best thing to do is throw out a smoke screen where he can't see what you're doing, that you might take your tank and slide around to the side or to the rear, and you can knock out a Tiger tank that way. Otherwise, you're just wasting your ammunition.
By May of 1943, the Allies had vanquished Axis forces in North Africa. Their next objective was liberating Italy before crossing the English Channel for the main invasion of Europe. Soldiers and airmen from the DTC played an important role in subduing Nazi forces, just as they did against the Japanese in the Pacific Theater.
Hitler and Nazism was an evil. No other word could describe it.
It's either kill or be killed. And I don't think the American people was brought up to be killers. You know what I mean?
Even with the best training, a new soldier is never completely prepared for the chaos and human cost of combat.
I really didn't think I was going to make it. None of us had that feeling that we were going to make it because the combat was so severe.
The mud and the debris raining down on you, the shrapnel and guys yelling medic and 101 things. That is hell.
Some of the young men were very stoic, no discussion. But I have learned over the years that the worst thing you can do is bury your memories.
Toward the tail end of the war, part of what we did in recon was when they heard of death camps, we went to the death camps. We liberated several of the death camps. And if you could personally play a critical role in eradicating evil, then you did good. You did good.
Although it was only an operation for 2 years, by early 1944, the Desert Training Center was closed. It had served its purpose, giving 1 million men the skills and toughness to fight. The war wasn't over yet, but our forces were at full strength.
Accumulation of all of these people in one space for a defined period of time, going through rigorous training, suffering hardship, supporting one another, learning to act as a team, was a defining experience for the so-called greatest generation, and I think colored the culture and politics of our society for a generation after World War II.
There's an esprit de corps that we developed during World War II that it never goes away.
We went downtown San Francisco. Everybody was on the street. It was great.
All the guys were standing on the side of the rail of the ship, and there wasn't a dry eye when we passed by the Statue of Liberty.
People say, "You're a hero, Harold." I said, "Yeah, at that time I was." But when you get caught in a place like that unexpectedly, you don't think of heroes. You just find the best way that you can find to get yourself out of it alive.
Looking out across the empty landscape, the urgency and sense of mission that once filled this desert is in stark contrast to the tranquility that now prevails. It was a different time, yes, but really not so distant.
What you're doing is going to gain you your freedom and get rid of the enemy. That's what we should be doing, and that's what we did.
I was scared, I'll admit it. But them guys that just keep plowing is the kind that won the war.
The remaining artifacts left behind testify to the determination, the sense of duty, and the sacrifice of all who came to this harsh and beautiful place in defense of freedom.
It's for the ages to determine. But freedom is not without sacrifice. Freedom is not without sacrifice.